just before Christmas, actually the same day that that man called the Gardaí on me for not wearing a mask in the supermarket, while I was sitting down waiting for the Gardaí to arrive to tell me that there was nothing for me to answer, I got talking to a local woman who told me that her husband had been a prison officer for the Irish Prison Service for many years. He was now long dead. And he had said to her 30 years ago that the do-gooders would be the ruin of this country. The woman and I agreed that he was a prophet. And it's interesting and very important as time progresses for us to compare Ireland to countries like, say, Japan or Switzerland or Israel, where the whole ethos of the country is based on protecting the citizens first. That could be defined as one of the most socialist doctrines of all, that the citizens come first. I recall from secondary school that there was an awful lot of gaslighting in relation to those who are less well off than ourselves. And what has happened in the past 5 or so years is that I've gone to court on numerous occasions to stop builders from wrecking my neighbourhood. What I mean by wrecking my neighbourhood is building high density flats, blocks of flats, in an area that's both very beautiful and that's close to the coast, and that actually in terms of traffic and infrastructure is quite choked. You will hear people say, oh, but you know, we have to do our bit for the broader society, and people are entitled to housing, and there's a housing crisis. And again, this is the cheese brain thing that Thomas Sheridan talks about. The housing crisis is caused by the government's refusal to build affordable, or genuinely affordable, not Varadkar affordable, genuinely affordable housing, particularly in depressed parts of the country. A very depressed town, from what I can see, is Ballybuffet. There are other depressed towns around the country. There are towns like Carlow Town, there's Nina. You could build 10,000 houses with garages and gardens in those, and that would solve the housing problem. If people didn't want to relocate, they could be given tax breaks. Everything I've described there is anathema to Fine Gael, particularly tax breaks. Fine Gael want to regulate as much as they can. They want to get their paws into everybody's lives as much as they can. But this will pass. I do not apologise in my capacity as a local resident in Howth for litigating to stop my community from being ruined, and I don't care what anybody thinks. In school, there were approved charities in school. And if you didn't, there was a lot of bullying by the management of the school to ensure that people supported these charities, including with their money. And it was an insight into this pathological altruism that the do-gooders subscribe to. The Queen gave a speech on Christmas Day talking about the Good Samaritan and how an individual in the Bible is described as helping another man who was in distress, even though the other man was not of the same religion or ethnic background as himself. I think any normal person would do that. It's normal to be a good Samaritan when you see another human being in distress. I'd like to think I'd be like that if I was in such a situation. If a person was distraught or they were desperate in a situation, genuinely so, I'd like to think that I wouldn't turn my back on them. I don't know, but I'd like to think that I wouldn't. That is entirely a different thing from pathological altruism, and entirely a different thing from official charities that are endorsed by a school management, whereby students who don't toe the line are bullied by teachers and bullied by the management and other pupils of the school. In a way, I suppose I valued from the insight that it gave me into how professional charity is, and now we see it with the NGO evil cancer that's doing so much damage in Ireland, how they're all part of the broader subset of pathological altruism. If more people in Ireland had the mindset of putting themselves first and weren't worried about what neighbours think, or people in the shops, or people who you encounter, or what the press might say, this would be a better country and not a worse one. It is an entirely natural human emotion to want to protect yourself and to protect those nearest and dearest to you, such as your parents, such as children, those who you live with, such as protecting your property, such as protecting the area that you live in. And again, there's this gaslight, NIMBY, not in my backyard. Well, I'm not going to worry about your backyard, am I? I don't know where you live, Ranelagh or Drumcondra or Phibsborough or wherever, Malahide, Clontarf. You worry about your backyard, I'll worry about mine. With the planning issues in Howth, there was the prospect, the very serious prospect of Howth being destroyed by short-term, short-sighted, essentially get-rich-quick schemes. This has now largely passed because who could have predicted what would happen in 2020? I am surprised personally to see now that there's going to be a 3-month lockdown because, okay, we're dealing with psychopaths. I see the primary protagonist as antagonist as Varadkar, but I didn't think they could be that stupid. But then, of course, I'm contradicting myself and I'm contradicting Thomas Sheridan. Yes, they're that stupid. Also, what has happened has been people are realising that there's something wrong here. That whatever RTE and Eileen Dunn and all of these ones are saying about wearing masks and, 5 million people died today in Northern Ireland, that it's not actually proving itself on the ground. But what is proving itself on the ground is that our hospitality industry is wrecked. Possibly, who knows what will happen? They don't. The people who've made all these stupid decisions, they don't know what's going to happen. They don't think beyond tomorrow. If you take Varadkar, he doesn't think beyond the next photo shoot. Varadkar, there's nothing positive there. There's nothing positive there. There's also, coupled with classic psychopathology of the bureaucratic career politician type, there's also a low IQ, and even by psychopathic standards, a lack of mature boundaries. A lot of psychopaths are able to learn the behaviours that work most of the time in adult society, at least superficially. Varadkar isn't even that intelligent. He's not an intelligent man. It was very unfortunate this year that Varadkar was acting Taoiseach while they all messed around trying to find out what they were going to do during a very critical period in this country. Because that was when, if there was ever a time, possibly since 1922, that we needed decisive leadership that was not craving popularity, that was when we needed it. Around February, March and April of this year. We needed somebody who was willing to say no and to say there's not nearly enough evidence to suggest that we take as draconian a measure as the globalist media are telling us that we have to. In the event of a national emergency, that would be a nuclear strike, or a chemical attack, or a deliberate biological weapon being released of a very big nature. There is the need to close things down. But that's martial law. We have had that here. We had it in 1922 with the Civil War. Martial law is a very specific situation where, as I said, there's a nuclear strike, or there's maybe a major tsunami, or a volcanic eruption, or something similar to that. This was a flu. This was a disease. Even on its own terms, the terms that RTE and the Irish Times have been peddling for 9 months, even on that particular, within that particular paradigm, it didn't even taken on its own facts justify the response. What would have been the correct response, even if COVID-19 had been as serious as they said it was? Well, the first response would have been in the long term that we shouldn't have wasted money on white elephants like the Children's Hospital, and instead that we had a functioning public general hospital system around the country. But no, that didn't happen because people vote Fine Gael and they just get away with doing whatever they want. At least so far. Because all things come to an end. The notion of the state intervening in a mandatory and punitive way in relation to public health, particularly given how indifferent the decision makers in this country actually are to public health when one looks at the public health system, the hospitals and so on and so forth. the notion of telling people, for example, that they have to wear a mask or that they have to be vaccinated is repugnant to any broad philosophical notion of a free society. People have the right not to take medicine. People have the right to risk getting sick. People have the right to drink alcohol. People have the right to take drugs. People have the right to smoke. People have the right to smoke cannabis. It doesn't mean it's good for them. Are they going to outlaw everything that's bad for people? Is this the plan? And you see, the populace of Ireland has spent so long, as that woman's late husband, who was the prison officer, said, the populace of Ireland has spent so long being gaslit into being do-gooders that they don't know how to respond. And the instinct to say, no, stuff it, I'm going to put my own selfish personal interests first here, that's been hammered out of so many people. I hated secondary school. I hated all the cultishness and the totalitarianism, the way they wanted to control every aspect of your life, even when you weren't in school. They tried that. They even tried that with past pupils. You know, they won't let past pupils go. But it gave me, it baffled and confused so many of them into not saying, hang on, my selfish interests come first. Ultimately, your most fundamental selfish interest is your right to life. So in other words, if somebody attacks you on the street, you have the right to protect yourself. But it extends to the right to retain your home and your assets, and the right to retain your freedoms, the right to retain your job. And yet, this was all stolen from a huge sector of the populace this year. It wasn't stolen from me. I'm on the dole. I'm still on the dole. The real dole, not the COVID dole, not the pretend, that bank loan that people are getting. That's going to hit hard, I can tell you. In March of this year, I said to people who own private businesses, sell, close, get rid of everything, get rid of the stock, get rid of the staff, get rid of your liability straight away. No, because it was 3 weeks to flatten the curve. Now it looks like we're going to be in lockdown until March, at least. But, you know, who knows after March. So then you have two people like Gemma O'Doherty and John Waters who brought a very misconceived and badly planned court case, but at least they did something rather than doing nothing. Then you have me and Hoth, who's litigating to stop the builders. I'm doing something rather than nothing. I'm not protesting at the gates of the building site. I'm not going on social media. I went into the High Court to stop it, and that's not over. Whatever might be being said, that's not over. O'Doherty and Waters could have gone about their case a lot better, but what was unedifying with O'Doherty and Waters was the mockery that they received from this large cheese-brain population of normiedom after, believe it or not, their application for leave for judicial review was refused, as I had predicted from the outset. I'm not jeering them as such, though, because I recognise, first of all, they didn't fundraise. They did it out of their own pockets and represented themselves. So they weren't going around to the begging bowl, neither am I. In my litigation, I represent myself. Although there is always the possibility that if you're taking a really good case, that senior counsel might want to take it on for you for free, and I'd never turn that away. At least I wouldn't turn it away in the first instance. If you're taking a public interest case, a case that is of prominence, then the barristers and the solicitors, particularly the barristers, get interested in that because they want to be the name attached to it if it wins. Even if it loses, if very important points of law are brought out in the rinse, then they want to have their name attached to that, even if it's published in case law. And a number of cases of mine now have been published in case law. So, you know, you get a reputation for being able to force issues, whether you win or lose. People don't realise this. O'Doherty and Waters did not go round with a begging bowl. They financed themselves as much as it costs to bring a judicial review on your own. It costs 190 quid to start a judicial review. The originating document is 190 quid. But what they went, you know, as I've explained elsewhere, I don't need to reiterate, they went about it fundamentally from the wrong procedure. So they were bound to fail. Also, I was of the opinion, and I still am of the opinion, that they went about it too early. Were they to go about it now, or particularly in January 2021, that's a different ballgame. That's a different ballgame. They're bringing an appeal. O'Doherty and Waters are bringing an appeal of the refusal of leave. I think they're going to lose that because the Court of Appeal, a lot of people don't understand, once you go beyond the High Court, you don't get a rehearing. You get an appeal beyond the High Court, examines the transcripts of the High Court and sees if there was some procedural flaw in the High Court. And if there was a procedural flaw in the High Court, it's sent back to the High Court for rehearing in the High Court. They don't rehear a case from scratch beyond the High Court. I don't think that they're going to succeed in their appeal. The judge who heard their case, Mr. Justice Charles Meenan, is actually a very fair judge. I've been in front of him numerous times. I cannot say a word against him. A very clever man. He writes very articulate and easy to read rulings, and I read the ruling in O'Doherty and Waters, and I thought his position was completely impeccable. So they're fighting a lost cause here. They'd be better off going about the way that Meenan actually suggested in his ruling, which is to start again in the High Court by way of a plenary action. No. They're going for an appeal of the procedural reasons why they failed. They're not going to win. They're not going to win. It's a waste of time, and they could also face a whopping bill of costs for the state. Because when I brought 2 judicial reviews this year, I won one on a millimetre of a technicality. Technically, very, very technically, I won it. I can't think of a smaller technicality to have won on, but I won. The other one I lost. Ironically, having lost the other judicial review, a judicial review, of course, cannot hear constitutional grounds unless the state is a defendant. And still, it's quite difficult. So having lost the other judicial review, constitutional issues that arose in the whole process before the judicial review and during the judicial review can now be heard in a plenary case. I started that case on the 22nd of December, just before everything closed for Christmas. So, this is how one goes about it. But with those 2 judicial reviews, when I opened them, I got leave to get an order to protect me from an order of costs against me. When I lost the judicial review I mentioned a moment ago, then the other sides, the defendants, all said, no, we're not going to go after you for costs, because they knew I'd get the order anyway, but they weren't that way inclined. They weren't vindictive that way, and they were good to deal with. That has to be said. They were good to deal with. They weren't at a personal level. They weren't bad to deal with. They didn't want to persecute me, going after me for costs, even forcing me to go in and activate the right to an order to protect me from God. No, they said it's okay. So that whole court case cost me €2,000, 1,500 of which was drawing down the goddamn transcript. If I'd used a stenographer, it would have cost me It could have cost me about 20,000 for a stenographer. But I got the transcripts, and that's taking me now to the constitutional level. There are ways of doing these things. O'Doherty and Waters did not go about it the right way, and they're still not. But hey, at least they're doing something. So here we are, and it's now the 29th of December, and it looks now like the Irish economy is still going to be frozen until March. People aren't going to survive this. But, I saw it coming back in March of 2020. I saw this coming. Sorry to be smug. I don't want to sound like Varadkar, but I did say to people in small private businesses, get out now, the ship is sinking. It's like the Titanic. The people who survived the Titanic put themselves first and jumped. Don't worry about your staff or your stock or your customers. Forget that. Get out. Don't be thinking about Magna Carta or common law or freeman on the land stuff like that silly hairdresser in Yorkshire. This is serious because you have a business here. You've invested in this. Time to go. No. And the greatest fool principle in economics means, first of all, 2 things. There are 2 things. The greatest fool is the person who pays the greatest amount for something that then they can't sell on. But also another important principle of economics, we're seeing it here in Howth with the property market, which is totally tanked in Howth. Totally tanked. The value of an asset, whether it is your shoes or whether it is your house or whether it is your car, is not what you say. It's not what RTE says. It's not what the Irish Times with their property.ie dog in the race says. The property of your asset is the total amount that the next person is willing to pay you for it. Economics can sometimes be very simple, and That's it. So we're seeing houses in Howth now looking for 1.5 million, and they're on the market 2 years. Can't think why. That's sarcasm.